I just want you to close your eyes and imagine this. Two winter torrents raging down from the mountains, swirling into a valley, hurl their great waters together. Flash floods from the well springs, plunging down in a gorge, and miles away in the hills, a shepherd hears the thunder. So from the grinding armies broke the cries and crash of war. You can just imagine yourself on a mountaintop, enjoying a breath of the crisp, fresh air, watching the river rushing down. But this is actually in the center of a battlefield, stained with the blood of fallen soldiers. Surprising, right? But this is how Homer in Iliad is also able to really communicate the poetic quality to suffering, which is the focus for today's episode.
But the passage you mentioned, I just thought that it was really interesting that Homer made those parallels because I've never considered the qualities of war as being poetic or maybe even beautiful.
Well, I guess amongst the description of people dying left and right, it definitely has an element of tragic beauty.
But I think this really gives us readers perspective to reflect on the complexities of war. Do you think war and fighting is inherent in human nature?
I think it's inherent everywhere in nature, not only in humans, like animals fighting for resources or trees fighting for sunlight and right. It's almost as if he's trying to portray war as something natural, a natural part of life that we are doomed to experience at one point or another.
I don't know if doom is the right word for that because the way Homer writes is so visually captivating. I think that by depicting suffering's beauty, given the short, brutal lives of people at the time, he really just wanted to show the suffering as commendable and beautiful. But there's also definitely this pointless quality to the visually enchanting battleground he paints. Amongst all the suffering, the tide of war is ultimately not up to the bravery of the warriors or their individual characters and strategy, but to the gods.
I found it really dark how Homer added context and humanized each side character, only to kill them off brutally in the following sentences. Giving each side and person their own spotlight, for me, highlighted the cruelty of war and death.
Huh, really? I felt like this was something that isn't done enough in today's blockbuster action films. The value of individual human lives are disregarded when putting emphasis on the larger than life superheroes. I cannot help but love how tragically poetic it is to give voice and story behind the usually faceless extras that die so casually on the side. But I think that's also just how people viewed war, life, and death in the world at the time. And life back then was just violent and unforgiving in general. Well, another thing that stood out to me was how much the gods dictated the lives of the characters. For example, the one scene of Ares deciding to enter the fray was so anticlimactic when you compare it to the enormous amount of lives lost as a result of that momentary thoughtless decision. Like, this whole struggle is ultimately pointless, dictated by the ever changing whim of the gods.
But that's what I love about Diomedes. He's the only character shown to actually be willing to defy that natural order.
Personally, I can't help but feel that he is more controlled by Athena than anything else, though. In the very end, the bravery of the warriors didn't matter all that much. This all wouldn't even have happened if not for the meaningless bet with the apple of discord. I think Homer is trying to communicate a message of the toils of humanity despite how meaningless it seems being dictated by those in power.
In the end, Homer's Iliad will always be a timeless work of literature, as it explores the inevitable physical and spiritual truths associated with being human, such as death and suffering.